This was part of his persona. He was like a chameleon. He would move from place to place and reinvent his self and his appearance.
So we got 1981, Barbara Stoppel's murdered, but between 1981 and 1987, we don't know of any murder he commits. However, there's multiple sexual assaults, assault caused bodily harm, arson, attempted murder. I could spend another hour on all the other victims.
He's a repeat sexual offender. He's got a rap sheet as long as my arm. He's said by the parole board to have important psychopathic traits. He's a person of serious concern.
Welcome to Crime Beat. I'm Anthony Robart. A series of savage sexual assaults and murders targeting teenage girls across Canada had detectives scrambling to collect evidence. The suspected perpetrator evaded capture by changing his appearance and hiding in plain sight. Here now is Jules Knox with part 2 of Die Like the Rest. But first, a short recap of part 1.
Barb was a very innocent girl, caring, outgoing. She was very friendly at the donut shop. She would talk at length with anybody, even a stranger.
A few days after Barbara Stoppel was savagely attacked, she died in hospital, just 16 years old.
Prosecutor George Dangerfield reminded the court it was a singularly brutal, singularly senseless crime.
Thomas Stoffano was arrested and faced 3 trials. He had 1 hung jury and 2 convictions.
I was going to be found guilty. I knew I was going to be found guilty.
But each time the appeal court overturned the verdict. And in December of 1985, detectives' prime suspect in Barbara Stoppel's murder was released.
I guess it was like a natural high with all pressure, like you can just float away.
No one is in custody now for that murder, so yes, the murder of Barbara Stoppel is out on the street right now.
And that brings us back to Christine Brown, the 16-year-old killed in the hills of Headley, British Columbia. She wore a shirt foreshadowing her murder. You mess with the best, you die like the rest. And after a long hunt retracing the victim's last known steps, an officer in Penticton checked his notebook. He'd responded to a mischief call at Joysticks Arcade, where Christine Brown was a witness. And standing next to her was a 29-year-old man named Terry Arnold.
That's the last person that would have seen or spoken to Christine. So let's see where Terry Arnold is. And when we ran his profile, Terry Arnold was in Dorchester Penitentiary, having committed violent sexual assaults on very young girls, 10, 12, 14 years old, in Newfoundland. So we figured, this could be our guy. He was convicted, sentenced to 5 years on multiple sexual assaults and rapes down there. Next, we would re-interview all these young girls in the event Terry may have given something up. He told us about, what Terry had done. One of them actually, he had tied to a tree and raped, threatened her with a knife. And while talking to these victims, I said to one of them, have you ever heard the expression, mess with the best, die like the rest? She froze and her eyes became as big as saucers. She says, Terry used to say that all the time. And so then as we interviewed the other girls, we would simply give the first part of the slogan and ask, can you finish this phrase for us, mess with the best? And each of them said, and die like the rest, because Terry said that always. This was emblazoned on the front of her t-shirt, mess with the best, die like the rest. It would have been permeated on his psyche. And so he could use that freely without any fear of being connected to her back in British Columbia, because her body hadn't been found for the year. My impression was that it could very well be like a psychological trophy that was kept.
Police went through Terry Arnold's file and they came across other alarming cases.
It had come up in a couple of cases of person of interest, and a person who was charged and went to court on a sexual assault down in the Abbotsford area.
So this is kind of like the area where it happened?
And one of those cases occurred less than 3 years before Christine Brown's murder. Even though this woman wants to share her name and her story, because she's a sexual assault survivor, her identity is under a court-ordered publication ban, so we have to disguise her. We'll call her Anne.
I was staying at a friend's house because I had run away and didn't have anywhere to go, so we were having dinner, and her uncle walks in with a friend, and that is Terry Arnold. I mentioned that I was looking for a place to stay, and he said he knew of a teacher, that he would take me there.
How old were you roughly?
16. I was so naive, I was beyond noticing anything wrong with him in the beginning. He drove me up a mountain, and there was a trailer park. That is his place. I walked in, and then I saw rifles, and they're sitting on the table. And then I heard a very bad video playing of a woman being raped. And so he pretty much pushed me towards the bed and raped me. I tried to scream, and then he started choking me and said that if I cooperate, that he won't hurt me. Then after that happened, he said he will take me to the teacher. And so we left his place and drove up the mountain. I don't even remember how far we went, but it was quite a ways. He told me that I wasn't coming back down.
Welcome back. A BC woman tells her story of a harrowing attack by a man suspected of murdering other teenagers. But seeking justice for his crimes remained elusive to her and his other alleged victims. We now return to Jules Knox with part 2 of Die Like the Rest.
We ended up getting out of the car and walking up the mountain. Like there was no trails or anything anymore. Then he stood behind me and put his arm around my neck. I didn't think I was coming back down. Somehow I managed to talk to him, and I was just talking about my family. He started talking about his family and bad things he's done. I just remember trying to connect somehow with him. And I just told him I wouldn't say anything. I wouldn't do anything about it, that he didn't need to worry. Then he raped me again. When we were trying to leave, his car is stuck. So he does walk away. There was nowhere to go unless I go into the forest. I actually searched his car. I didn't know his name. He had said it was Sam. Then I found his ID and read it. Terry Samuel Arnold. I just left my fingerprints all over the car too.
So the police would be able to trace?
Yeah.
Anne said that once the car was moving again, she asked to be dropped off at a nearby mall, and Terry Arnold surprised her by giving her his knife.
He said to protect myself against people like him.
So he gave you a knife?
Yeah. Trust me, I wanted to do something to him, but I couldn't. Like, I'm only a kid. One thing I did notice about him too, there was no emotion or feeling in when he talks or his eyes.
It's just dead inside?
Yeah.
Anne said she reported the rape to police and went to the hospital.
I just get one of those exams. I had a lot of like dirt and debris throughout my body because of being in the forest.
Terry is charged with sexual assault, and it goes to court.
His lawyer was really trying to make it seem like it was completely consensual.
The young lady as a witness wasn't believed credible, according to the judge, and he says, I can't decide on who to believe, whether this runabout guy who has he said, the morals of an alley cat, or this runaway young girl. So he dismisses the case.
If the Chilliwack judge had simply believed her and Arnold had gone to jail, then it is quite possible, even likely, that Christine Brown would be alive today.
Christine Brown's body had been dumped up a remote Forest Service road in 1991, 3 years after Anne's rape. And there was another case with chilling similarities. Just 3 months before the attack on Anne, 19-year-old Roberta Ferguson vanished from Cultus Lake less than half an hour away.
Kind, loving, beautiful, very spiritual, very artistic.
Roberta Ferguson had been living with her older sister, Verl.
Roberta was 19 and my daughter, Robbie, was 15. They were like sisters. They used to go dancing every weekend and have their own little dance duet. They had gone into a summer program to train 5 or 6 Aboriginal students, going to different companies that would hire them for maybe 1 or 2 weeks and see how they like that. And at the end of the summer, they went on to Cultus Lake to end the season, and that's when I never saw her again. My daughter went to go and see Roberta if there was in a tent and noticed that her backpack was gone, so she went out to go look, and she seen my sister walking towards a store, so she figured that Roberta was just going to the store and she'd come back. And she didn't come back. From what my daughter was telling me, that there was this one person that was always following her around, this red car. So I guess that car was circling. I don't know if he was observing to see who he could take.
Terry lived within 500 feet, I think, of where she was camping. He was driving a borrowed Volkswagen, a small Volkswagen, and she was seen getting into a small red car.
A composite drawing was done of the suspect in that case, and RCMP thought that it was very good likeness to Terry Arnold.
As police collected more information about Terry Arnold, they re-examined a Calgary cold case that unfolded in June of 1987.
I was working in the chief's office in the police department in Calgary. Like everybody else there, we knew there was a body found. Nobody had identified it yet, and they were concerned about who she was. While I was at work, the phone rang. It was my mom. And then she said, I'm worried that it might be Denise, because she didn't show up yesterday. So I went over to the morgue, and to my shock, I recognized her, and just the color went out of my face. I could just feel it, Phoned my mom and said, yeah, it was Denise, it's Denise.
17-year-old Denise Lapierre was Staff Sergeant Dennis Lapierre's niece.
I remember Denise as being a really happy, bubbly, chubby-faced little girl. She was always cheery.
She was last seen leaving her house in northeast Calgary in June 1987 during a party she was hosting. Lots of people watched her go.
She left the house about 1:30 in the morning, as best as we can narrow down, and informed her friends that she'd be back within an hour. She never did come back.
Terry Arnold is a suspect in Lapierre's death. Denise Lapierre's body was found here in this back alley, and just 50 paces down the alley is where Terry Arnold lived at the time of the crime. This is his house. It's across the street from Denise's, and police have been back here many times over the years trying to piece this crime together. The night Lapierre was killed, Arnold told police he was helping his girlfriend.
Her body is found naked. She had been washed and she'd been sexually assaulted. He was originally thought of as a suspect, but at the time, he got his girlfriend to lie, saying that he was there all day.
She was afraid of him. She was afraid for her daughter. She was afraid for herself. I don't blame her for lying about it.
And unfortunately for everyone involved, there was also another sex predator in the area that they focused their attention on. This girlfriend that he had also had a daughter. And during this time period, he was with them for about 3 months, at which time he sexually assaulted this girl well over 100 times.
So this girlfriend vouches for Terry Arnold's alibi
Yes.
on the night of Denise Lapierre's
Yes.
murder, but then he goes on to sexually assault her daughter.
Yes.
Suzanne Wilton, a reporter with the Calgary Herald newspaper, has been working on the Lapierre murder for months. She says Arnold's girlfriend supported his alibi until now.
She tells a different story and remembers people coming around asking about the missing girl.
Many years later, she had gone to police and told them that she had lied for him. And one day I received a phone call after writing a story about Terry Arnold. His sister reached out to me. She was convinced he was innocent, and she believed that I, as an investigative reporter, could prove his innocence. So we arranged for a phone call, and we began talking.
Terry Arnold was last seen with Christine Brown outside an arcade in Penticton. And after interviewing some of his other victims, police were certain he was involved in her murder.
The next move would be to go to Dorchester Penitentiary and interview Terry Arnold. So he comes in and sits down. He's very, very cordial, and we went through everything that we had with him. He never asked for any lawyer or anything. He'd never lawyered up on us, we'll say. He said that he had given Christine his brother's name, who also worked at the carnival in Calgary. If she wanted to go there, she could look him up and possibly get a job. And Terry would definitely use that as an in to gain her confidence, you know, to say, listen, I can do this for you, you know, which was Terry.
So you're not able to get a confession out of him?
No confession, none. We figured our last, and which is a ditch effort, is to try an undercover operation, Mr. Big Sting. He was going to be in jail for another 3-4 years for violent sexual assaults in Newfoundland. And we would have to wait for Terry to serve out his time. And then at that time, we would engage him.
When Terry Arnold was released in 1997, he's watched around the clock, and undercover officers infiltrated his inner circle.
Terry's now in with this guy, so he's introduced himself, takes Terry for a beer. Then he says, well, you know, maybe there's a place in our organization for someone like you. He gets Terry to do some more things, a little more independent, like, okay, well, we need you to pick this up. So Terry's taken in by it. Feels that, yeah, these are the Hells Angels.
And they tell Terry that we understand you're a suspect in a murder of Christine Brown, and we think you did it, and we need it to go away.
And so they convinced Terry that, well, yeah, the police were really totally convinced that you're the guy, which is too bad because we couldn't have somebody like that in our organization. We don't want, you know, the cops to be coming around because there's something that's unresolved. However, we have a fella that can take the fall, but we need detail.
We've got a guy, another Hells Angels, in jail right now. He's dying of cancer. What you need to do is tell us everything about the murder so we can tell him, and he will confess to it.
And so Terry says, yes, I did kill her. I did kill that girl. He raped her, had sex with her twice, killed her with a rock, and then dumped her body up Green Mountain Road. And then, so he says, we can fly to Vancouver. We get some stuff to do in Vancouver, and while we're there, you know, you can show us. And they go up to Green Mountain Road, and Terry shows in a really close area, in proximity to where the body was found. I think I dumped her right around here. You know, that's where I put her, covered her up with trees and stuff. And he said, and I threw her jeans away, and then as I drove up the road that way, going back to Penticton, I threw her running shoes out the window. We went back and they found a running shoe.
It had been 6 years since Christine Brown's murder, but the shoe presented key new evidence.
And we're satisfied with his confession, showing what he did and where he was, and then the following day arrest is made.
Constable Arch Duty sat down for his second interview with Terry Arnold.
I said, "Do you remember who I am?" I said, I introduced myself. He said, "Yeah, I remember who you are." And he said, "You got everything you need. You don't need my statement." And so that was it.
Arnold was living in the Maritimes, but he returned to Kelowna last Friday. 2 days later, he was arrested. The RCMP won't say if they somehow tricked him into returning to the Okanagan voluntarily.
Some months later, before the trial, he connected with me and he says, "I want to talk to you. I want to make a deal." He said, "You can't take notes, and this is not going to be recorded. Just sit there and we'll talk." I said, "Okay." And he said, "You know I'm going to be convicted of this. I'm going to go to jail for life. But I'll plead guilty to manslaughter. I'll get 5-6 years, but you have to drop the case of my raping my girlfriend's daughter in Calgary. That has to go. You can't be charged with that. And you can't go with the dangerous offender category on me." He said, and with that, he said, "I'll plead guilty to manslaughter." Of course, I mean, there was no deal to be made. But the fact that he even pitched a deal is certainly an admission of guilt.
Hey Terry, show us your face. I remember seeing him in court because I was there when he was coming out, when sheriffs were bringing him out, and he wouldn't show his face.
The jury found Terry Arnold guilty of the first-degree murder of Christine Brown.
Terry Arnold. He's now serving 25 years in a Fraser Valley prison. Now media reports in Winnipeg say police are investigating Arnold in the death of Barbara Stoppel. The 16-year-old waitress was found strangled in a Winnipeg donut shop in 1981.
The year was 1999. I was assigned to reinvestigate the murder of Barbara Gail Stoppel. We sat down at our desk and started reading. And within a matter of about 2 hours, we both looked at each other and go, "My God." The real person, the real killer, came into police attention within days of the murder and kept on popping up over and over and over again.
Welcome back. As police reopen the case of a murdered 16-year-old girl almost 2 decades later, the man wrongly charged in her murder continued to try and clear his name. We now return to Jules Knox with part 2 of Die Like the Rest.
In 1981, Barbara Stoppel was strangled in Winnipeg's Ideal Donut Shop 2 days before Christmas. She fought for her life for days before dying in hospital. Police arrested Thomas Sofino, and he faced 3 trials. After 1 hung jury and 2 guilty verdicts, Sofino won on appeal. And in 1985, after 45 months behind bars, he was set free. For nearly 2 decades, he tried to prove his innocence as he lived with a cloud of suspicion around him. In 1999, detectives were told to review the file, and the government called a public inquiry.
The initial pages of the investigation, we learned that a male by the name of Terry Samuel Arnold went to the hospital where Barb was staying a few days after the attack. He wanted to speak with Barb's mother, Muriel. Muriel went down and spoke with him, and he said he was a friend of Barb's and that he wanted to know how she was doing. He wrote down his name, his address, on a piece of paper. Muriel kept that and forwarded it to the police. At the time, Terry Arnold lived across the street from the Ideal Donut Shop. He wore a cowboy hat, he had cowboy boots. He came on our radar immediately because we're inundated with people who say it's Terry Arnold. So I think it was 5 or 6 times he called police saying that he thinks he knows who the murderer was. He'd point out people. He's being drawn to it constantly. He has no alibi.
Terry Arnold and Barbara Stoppel had both worked at the Red River exhibition over the summer. At the time, Barbara Stoppel was 16 years old, and Terry Arnold was 19. He was interviewed as a possible suspect 2 months before Thomas Sofino.
He was interviewed several times by the Winnipeg police officers at the time, and it went nowhere. He's a crafty liar.
In 1999, detectives reviewing the case hoped that scientific advances might be able to help with new leads.
I had a massive issue with continuity of evidence and with missing exhibits. I can't find Barb Stoppel's bra. I can't find her underwear. One of the exhibits that we were also missing was a Kleenex with mucus on it, belonged to the killer. We could have done DNA on that. I looked at the evidence log book. Stoppel exhibits were taken out and destroyed. And within 24 hours of the court ruling saying that Tom Sofino could not be tried again. To say I was astounded is an understatement. I couldn't believe what was going on. This retired inspector destroyed exhibits, kept exhibits. Basically, we have no case anymore. It's a confession case.
Terry Arnold remained behind bars for Christine Brown's murder, and detectives wanted to charge him for killing Barbara Stoppel, too.
I did a search warrant on his cell. Found some things of interesting writings he was doing. He was the editor in the newspaper in the prison, but nothing to link him with the murder of Barbara Stoppel concretely. The last time I interviewed him was, it's what I call 3.5 hours into the abyss, because that's what it felt like. He refused to allow us any videotape. I couldn't force him to do it, so he refused. He said he wanted me to let me get into his head, to understand what he's all about, to understand him. And he started making almost like deals, saying like, I can go for certain murders, you know the ones, you're a smart man, but not this one, not Stoppel. But he would entertain the fact of talking to me and saying, what if? Let's play a game of what if. He basically said, if I was to go to that donut shop on that night, it wouldn't be to steal. It wouldn't be to take $33. The fact that he remembered it was $33. It would have been to sexually assault. That's why I would have been there. What probably happened was he did go there to sexually assault her. He had the twine, he tied her up. When things went too far, she relieved herself. And he also heard people at the door, and the moment was ruined. So he left. And that's probably most likely what happened that night. And that's as close as Terry Arnold could ever get to the truth.
During the inquiry, the murder weapon came under scrutiny.
They believe that the twine found around Barb Stoppel's neck originated from British Columbia, BC Hydro. Thus, there must be a connection with the killer and British Columbia.
And that's largely how Thomas Sofino became a suspect. Not only did he look like the suspect sketch, but he was living in BC, just visiting Winnipeg over the Christmas holidays.
One of the first steps in a homicide investigation is you analyze the murder weapon. This test would have cost $100 back then, but it was never done. When I went and had it analyzed, they determined that the twine was in fact manufactured in Portage la Prairie. There was no connection with British Columbia whatsoever.
Police also came under fire for the photo lineup they used, where Thomas Sofino clearly stood out with a non-white background.
Police at the time were desperate enough to utilize a sex offender, a liar, and a thief to implicate Tom Sofino, saying that he had mentioned to them that he had killed the girl. There was one more jailhouse informant that we didn't find out about until much later in the investigation, and that was the real killer of Barbara Stoppel, who tried to implicate Tom Sofino, saying that he confessed to him while in jail.
In the mid-'80s, Terry Arnold was in and out of jail for a variety of unrelated offenses, including theft and assault.
Before my third trial started, Terry Arnold was put into B block where I was. When this person came in through the doors, he was yelling, "Where's Sofino? Sofino, where's Sofino?" And I'm laying in my cell there and says, "Oh God, do I really need to do this?" And he's, in a huff or something. So I go to the door, bang on the door, guard up. I says, "Take me to the hole. I don't want to do this." So the guard, they took me to the hole. It's a cement, steel walls, a hole in the floor, and a Bible.
And you'd rather be there right now than talk to this guy that's coming in yelling your name?
He was put in there for something.
Terry Arnold claims that he was talking to Tom Sofino and asked him, "Did you kill that girl?" And Tom, according to Terry Arnold, said, "Yes, I did. And if you keep talking to me, you're next." Terry Arnold went to a detective to give him this information so he could get out of jail earlier. Unfortunately for Terry Arnold, it didn't work.
When I learned that Terry Arnold was the suspect in the Barbara Stoppel murder, it was at my inquiry.
Testifying during the public inquiry took an emotional toll on Thomas Sofino.
He accused me of murder. He said I killed her.
Serious questions over conduct by the police arose, especially about a 4-hour interrogation they held in Vancouver, where Sofino was living.
You know what prompted them after interviewing you for an hour and a half to ask you to take off your clothes at that point?
Well, I kept on saying that I killed her.
Did they take your will from you? Did they take your will from you, Mr. Sofino?
Yeah, pretty close to it, yeah.
Yeah, to strip search and bend down, spread them. I really don't remember much. Well, maybe I do. But I'd much rather not.
What would you ask for if you sued for damages?
In a dollar sense? Mm-hmm. You can't, how can you put a dollar sign on your life? What would you sue for? What would you request? After you spent 45 months in prison for something you didn't do, after 3 trials.
And they put me in a death cell. And inside the room is a barred cage. You can see through on bars all the way around you. And all you have is your bed and a toilet. There's a door there. That's where they would take people who sentenced to death to hang them. And every day at 3 o'clock, they would always test the trap door. There was like a psychological game that the guards were playing.
And the torture continued even after Thomas Sofino was acquitted. His house was firebombed, and many people treated him as a man who got away with murder.
The past 18 years of my life have been very difficult.
The inquiry awarded Thomas Sofino $2.6 million in compensation.
There was no level of money that would justify what was done. Sorry. At that time, I was devising to make up a bomb. This is how messed up I was. I was going to make a massive amount and put it in a car and put it into the police underground parking lot and blow up the police station. And then I realized, if I do that, then I'm going to kill the innocent people that are in the remand. That's when I snapped out of it.
2 decades after Barbara Stoppel was killed, her family still didn't have closure.
Since the inquiry, as I said, it's worse because we're living her last few minutes over and over again. And it's just not fair.
It's like constantly going back for the same painful surgery over and over and over, and you know what's coming. And it's not even finished for us. We have to proceed forward onto however knows how long it's going to be until the new suspect is charged, arrested, and tried. The police have had 23 years to solve this. We gave them Terry Arnold's name approximately 5 days after Barb was attacked. From that time on, they did very little with Terry.
And we learned that there were 2 more witnesses. They knew about him in '85 and '84. And these 2 women were inside the donut shop on the day of the murder and saw Terry Arnold wearing the cowboy hat, wearing the cowboy boots, with a pockmarked face, and he was bothering the waitress. Well, one of these people lived in the same apartment on Cromwell as Terry Arnold. She knew him. And this was never followed up on. Today, because of Stitchcomb, the law that it was enacted, the Crown has the obligation to give all evidence to the defense. This was not the case back in those days. It was not the case in any one of the trials. So they were allowed to withhold information. If the defense was allowed to have the file and read it, they would also know who the real killer was.
And police continued to work on the case to charge the man they now believe to be the real killer of Barbara Stoppel.
Welcome back. A man convicted of killing a 16-year-old girl and suspected in other murders and rapes across the country remains behind bars. But for how long? Here now is Jules Knox with the conclusion of Die Like the Rest.
While Terry Arnold had not been charged in Barbara Stoppel's death, he was still behind bars because he'd been found guilty in Christine Brown's murder.
Terry was actually quite charismatic. Because he was so clever, he was incredibly articulate. He regularly called me from prison, usually once a week. He would tell me all of the reasons why he was innocent, and I would ask him questions. My final interview with Terry was face-to-face. It culminated in a prison where he was being held in British Columbia. And that's where I began to confront him about all of the terrible crimes that I had found, all of the contradictions in his stories. It was one of the toughest interviews I've ever done because he was incredibly smart and he was incredibly manipulative. The conversation became very heated, and I was scared at one point that he might leap across the table. He was very angry. I think that he thought he was smarter than everyone else. There was one last phone call from prison, and it was Terry telling me that he'd read the story and that he was going to write another book, and it was going to be called Death of a Reporter. I asked him if he was threatening me, and he said, "Take that for whatever you want it to be."
After the jury found Terry Arnold guilty of Christine Brown's murder, he successfully appealed his conviction. A new trial was ordered, and then, without warning, the Crown suddenly dropped the charge, and in the spring of 2002, Arnold was released.
And the police called me then to warn me. They didn't know what he would be capable of, and it was terrifying.
He is evil. He should not be let out.
I was so angry that they let him go. I still have a hard time trusting the judicial system of what they do to our people. I felt like we were dirt.
Given everything that the police knew, given all of the work that all of the various agencies had been doing, and the fact that there were still unsolved murders, that the prosecution chose to stay the charges and not proceed with a new trial. To me, that was just another travesty in the long, long, long travesties that Terry Arnold beset on the world.
Firstly, Mr. Arnold's free because he should be free. The police ran a botched police investigation, produced in an elaborate undercover sting operation, where those confessions are inherently unreliable because people that do confess in them are under inducement, fear, pressure, all for the purposes of targeting a confession out of that individual. In this case, and in the case against Terry Arnold, that confession was completely uncorroborated.
He's a repeat sexual offender. He's got a rap sheet as long as my arm. He's said by the parole board to have important psychopathic traits. He's a person of serious concern.
There's multiple sexual assaults, assault caused bodily harm, arson, attempted murder, all these other crimes that happened. Around 1985, 86, he took off to the United States. I have no idea what he did down there, but I can only imagine.
He loved anonymity. That's why he used aliases. He used other people's stolen credit cards, and he passed himself off as being a reverend at one time. And people would believe him, and he would carry it to the nth degree.
Terry Arnold was someone who lurked in the shadows. Why didn't his name make it to the headlines? Well, I think because of the victims that he chose. Vulnerable people in society, Indigenous women, teenage girls. Then he would disappear and move to the next city or to the next town, and it would start all over again. It's hard to know what was fact or fiction, but Terry talked a lot about the things that were done to him as a child. He made claims that he was sexually abused. I certainly did interview some of his family members. They painted a picture of a very troubled child who hurt animals, who lied.
I think he was 9 years old when he committed his first sexual assault on a 6-year-old girl.
Although Terry Arnold was investigated as a suspect in Roberta Ferguson's disappearance while camping, he was never charged in her death.
I confronted him on this one, and he says, they can't convict me. They haven't found the body. And to this day, it's unsolved and her body's never been found.
In Calgary, police detectives say they're shocked that Terry Arnold has been set free. They're continuing to investigate the killing of 17-year-old Denise Lapierre. The girl's battered body was found in 1987 in the laneway behind the house where Arnold lived.
I talked to him about Denise Lapierre, and he volunteered this, that if there's blood inside my house and it's hers, it's because she came over for coffee and she cut her finger on something. So now you've got this guy admitting that she was in his house, that she was bleeding in his house, and he helped her put a bandage on her.
Years after Denise Lapierre's murder in Calgary, her uncle said he called the cold case unit.
He says, we're 99.99% sure it was him who did it. Terry Arnold. I know it left my brother terribly depressed. Ultimately, it killed him.
RCMP came to Winnipeg to interview myself and advised us that the Crown Attorney was going to be reopening the case and hopefully charging Terry Arnold with the murder of Christine Brown once again.
In 2005, Terry Arnold was also facing new charges of child pornography.
Then he committed suicide. Was it poetic justice? Because had he not committed suicide, he'd likely be still in jail. Terry was still trying to be in charge. If he was sent to jail for the rest of his life, that was out of his control. So he would control his own fate by committing suicide. And that's the psychopathic part of Terry Arnold.
He was a very evil person, and I'm glad that he's no longer here to do any more harm. What we would like to have had is the proof.
I have never seen the suicide note, but I do know that it was the same rhetoric. Woe is me, everyone against me, I didn't commit any murders.
It's an extensive note, and you know, in answer to your question, did he confess to anything? No, he didn't.
You coward. No, why didn't you just be honest? Just be honest about what you did to all these people.
You know, Robert Picton and Clifford Olson we know about because of the depth of the investigations that were done on them. These guys operated within certain confines. Terry Arnold operated everywhere. What angers me is the fact that we don't know the full sweep of what he has done.
For about 10 years, I believe, I had really severe PTSD. I was always looking over my shoulder. The one girl, Christine Brown, really stuck in my head for a long time. All I could think about was her. She was the same age as me, not far from me, and I did carry a lot of guilt for a long time about it. Like if I had tried harder or done something different, that he would have gone to jail for what happened to me, and then maybe she wouldn't have died.
So you felt responsible for not being able to put Terry Arnold away?
Yeah. Back then I did, but I knew I was only a kid and I couldn't help anyone.
I went to a dark place. I know I was messed up, but to what extent, I have no idea. Saying that I didn't do it is redundant.
I'm a firm believer in karma.
Thomas Offino spent nearly 4 years behind bars for a murder he did not commit. Terry Arnold served less than 5 years for Christine Brown's murder and was never charged in the disappearance of Roberta Ferguson nor the cold-blooded murders of Denise Lapierre and Barbara Stoppel. For their families, justice has not been served. I'm Anthony Robart. Thank you for joining us tonight on Crime Beat.
Want more episodes of Crime Beat? Listen to the Crime Beat podcast now for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find your favorite podcast. And for past episodes of Crime Beat, go to the Global TV app visit globaltv.com or check out our Crime Beat YouTube page.